Hi, this is Sarah Burgess from 1080, and I'm here today for week 9 of Career Insights. Today we are covering virtual interviews and some of the preparation that you need to do around those different face-to-face interviews. So we have our two interview experts from 1080 with us today. So it's Claire Endicott and Marc Whitmore. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire initially just to give a brief intro of herself. So hi, Claire.
Hi there. Um, so in the past, I've been an HRBP for a number of years, working in financial services. I'm used to sitting the other side of the table. I've interviewed obviously a range of people, from people who work in administration to those who joined an investment banking board.
Great. Okay. And Marc?
Good afternoon, everybody. I've worked in financial services for more years than I would care to say, so over 20 years, mostly initially in HR generalist roles, then in organisational development roles. For about just over 2 years, I've worked myself as a career coach, and I do a lot of my work now with 1080 as an associate, very much focusing on career coaching, outplacement, career transition, and general career coaching. And as Sarah said at the beginning, a big focus of my role is around helping clients with interview skills.
Excellent. Thank you both. So just before I put the first question up, I can see there's already quite a lot of people. We've got about 70 people registered today. So that's really great. So as you are watching, if you have a question that you want to ask, please do comment on LinkedIn and we will see that and I can put them up on the screen. Also, if there's anything you particularly like that we say, if you can click on the like button on LinkedIn, so again, that just gives us kind of feedback as we're going into the kinds of things that you like to hear about. So here we go with the first question. So how would you prepare for a virtual interview? So Claire, if you'd like to start on that one.
It's a great question. So obviously you do all the things you'd normally do for an interview. So you'd research the company, you'd probably do a SWOT analysis, you might look at their accounts. You'd see if you have a connection on LinkedIn that actually was working at the company. You'd probably look at Glassdoor just to get a sense of the culture. And then you'd obviously try and prepare as to why do you want the role and what are the three things you might want to get across the interview. What makes the virtual interview different? So obviously you've got the opportunity to practice on Zoom, record yourself. I know it's a bit grim, but it gives you an opportunity to get the subtles and the away. Here's a bit of science. The University of Pittsburgh says that if you mentally rehearse a task, it affects the way you actually perform it because it activates the brain's essential prefrontal cortex, so that when you actually do it for real, it's easier, smoother. So obviously there's practical elements. We've got the technology works in advance. Is the background appropriate? Probably some flowers or an orchid would be great. Ideally a flat wall. I think it's quite useful to have a picture, nothing too or controversial. But you also don't want it too intriguing because you want people to look at you rather than getting really interested in the picture that's behind you. Also, there's an element that you need to be, your background needs to reflect what you're saying. So, for example, if you're saying, I want to be a project manager, I've got great attention to detail, and it looks like you've had a party behind you, it doesn't all quite match up. With regards to background, I appreciate that some people are in a house share, and it just may be very problematic. So you obviously can get green screens, but just be a bit careful that you don't move too much because you can end up with slight strange aura if you do that. Lighting is obviously important. Ideally, you want lighting to come from two different angles, and one of them has to be quite helpful, not the expensive lights that can be quite bendy and help with that. There's also on Zoom a rather marvellous bit of AI. So if you go to video settings and video, you can touch your phone. So you can get rid of any sort of wrinkles if you have any. Obviously, adjust the height of the chair so that you're looking into the camera. I appreciate that can be quite hard. So maybe put a little post-it note against the camera just to remind yourself. And the other thing that might be helpful is just picture someone you love by the camera, so that actually you're not talking to someone who might be a complete stranger, but you're talking to somebody who you care about. And also headphones. Your voice is clearer, and looking at you can zone out any other sounds that might Anything else you want to add, Marc, on that?
Yeah, I think on the day, as Sarah talked about, I think there's a good chunk of what Claire said that you could do again. So, for example, the technology. So even if you've got everything working the day before, you need to check that again. Particularly things like Wi-Fi connection. I've checked the background again. Again, it's just getting that routine. But I think what I wanted to really talk about, for example, is there's some real sort of advantages, I guess, things that are different for you preparing on the day. So, for example, a big thing that you don't have to do is you don't have to travel. So you don't have the concern around traffic jams, around trains. So basically, you've got, you walk in potentially from your kitchen to your office or wherever. But what that does present also is still having a routine, still having a focus where how do you get yourself ready beforehand? So, different things that people can do is listen to their favourite record, is walk the dog if they've got a dog, or even if people listen to Mindspace or anything, just something when naturally, when you're travelling or when you're sat in reception waiting, that you kind of clearly focus. So I think that's one thing. I think other things are how you dress. I know I've had different conversations with some of my clients. Bottom line, to keep it simple, is put a suit on, a shirt, tie, dress. Don't worry about the way the organisation dresses, whether there's a dress code, just dress professionally. You're on interview. I know Claire has talked about this. If there is a dress down code, wait till you join. Before you joining, it's very much about the image that you present. Little things if it's possible. Try not to have any Amazon delivery, so if you're planning it. Also with your phone, again, obviously very much common sense. Always keep your phone on just before, just in case if things aren't working and the interview's trying to contact you. But the minute it starts, put your phone off. Make sure you do that. Don't go to silence or anything like that, because little things like I have emergency bypass. So not that my children ever ring me, but they probably would choose to ring me when I was sat at an interview. It would override it, and my lovely ringtone to my children would come in. And yeah, I think also it's taking account of things like homeschooling. So again, just a little tip, just keep everything you're thinking about. At the start of the interview, if you have put your kids sat out, one of your kids or sat outside, it's probably just explaining to the interviewer and saying, I am homeschooling at the moment, so if there is any background noise, apologies in advance. The chances are, at least if you've got viewers, maybe doing the same things themselves. And again, nothing else that might build a little bit of empathy. So a big thing is just getting everything right in your mind. Rechecking the stuff that Claire said, and just those extra bits of detail. I'm going to say common sense, but just taking every little bit of detail so you're ready for when you're starts.
Brilliant, thank you. I think one thing I would just add on the interview prep, so the Zoom tip is great, Claire. I didn't know about that. You can touch yourself up. That's really handy. But on LinkedIn, if you go to the job search tab, what you can do there is actually do some virtual interview prep. So if you don't have a career coach or someone that you can run through questions with, that's really good. So it picks up some of the key questions. And then you basically record yourself and you can watch it back. You can also send it to someone else as well so they can give you feedback. So I think that's quite a useful tool if you haven't got the facility of kind of, doing a mock interview with someone. So I'm just going to put up one of the first questions that's just come through. And I will hand that over to Marc to answer. So how should you react if one of the interviewers turns their camera off midway through? This happened to me last week. So thank you, Anthony, for that question. Marc, have you got any ideas on that one?
Thank you so much for putting me on the spot.
No problem.
I think that's a really interesting one. I think to be honest, I think I would do nothing. I think I would just pause. I think I would just wait. It could be a number of things. So I guess without second guessing it, it could be their technology, somebody, the interviewer, somebody inadvertently could have walked into the room. So I would look at that as a positive and say they're being professional, something may have happened, but the main thing is just wait. Also remember that they may still be able to see you. So don't do anything. Don't look away. Don't necessarily look down. Just keep your position and wait.
Yeah. Okay. Anything to add to that, Claire? Or?
Well, we're assuming that that's a very sort of positive, you know, that they're phoning because they've turned the camera off because they, you know, there's been a hit to the technology. If you felt that perhaps it wasn't to do with that, I'd always say for an interviewer, it's just as important that they're selling their company. So it's very much a two-way street. They think, well, actually, what do I think about this if the person doesn't apologise? So see it very much, it's not just you are in control as well, you know, to see it as a positive. You know,
Good. I just.
So could anybody hear the doorbell and my dog barking like that?
I could. Good, and that's just, I just put this comment on from Alison here, which is because that very thing. So, I mean, interesting. I mean, I can't believe someone actually said that. That's fun.
I just wanted to say, Sarah, I deliberately did that because that's an example of what not to do in an interview. So it's always good to kind of demonstrate the downsides of doing something like that.
Well, that's the thing. You just can't control everything, can you? So Jill has just got a tip here to say aim to be the smartest person in the room, which, yeah, that's a really good point. And then Michael's asked a question here: is there a good time of day to be interviewed? So, Marc, have you got any thoughts around that?
I think, well, it all depends on control of the interviewee that you've got. But I mean, I think it's very much down to the individual. So in terms of when a person is most focused and most productive. So if it was me, I would prefer an interview late morning because I find that, say, 10 o'clock onwards, because I get my preparation done first thing. So I'm not waiting, particularly if I'm nervous. So I get up, get my preparation done. And that's when I do the interview, and that's when I am most productive. So I think if I was being asked beforehand, the company was saying, are there any particular times that work for you? Personally, for me, I would be doing it sort of late morning to suit my focus and how energized I am.
I'd agree with that as well. I think it's quite good. It's not too early, but not late enough that it starts eating into your whole day, and you've got that whole time to kind of worry, I suppose. Claire, have you got any other thoughts?
Yes, I completely agree. I think after lunch is always a bit of a tricky time because you don't know what the interviewer might be feeling slightly sluggish after lunch. And also that slot just before the end of the day. I think that's sort of 4:35 o'clock interview is quite tough.
Yeah. We've just had a comment back from Anthony about his interview. So he's saying here that the interviewer didn't mention at all, and nor did Anthony, left it off for the remainder of the interview. So that was very odd. Well, I guess if you carried on, then I think that's the main thing, really, isn't it? And I suppose there might have been some disaster going on in the background of the interviewer's room or something like that. Who knows? But odd not to kind of acknowledge it.
I think interestingly on that, I think that does take Claire's point. I think that does, to me, that tells you something about the organisation you're interviewing and the professionalism and competence of the interviewer.
Yeah. Michael just said never do back-to-back interviews. I think, yes, I'd agree with that. I think it's bad enough doing meetings back-to-back, let alone interviews, so that would be quite tricky. Okay, so next question here I'm going to put up. So what are the benefits of virtual interviewing? So I think most people kind of worry about virtual interviews, but there are some pluses. So Claire, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of Marc, you referenced this. I think sometimes you don't have a nightmare journey. There's no landing in a puddle on the way there. There's no getting lost. Anyone that knows me knows I have got no sense of direction at all. And I have to allow all this extra time because I'm bound to get lost around my time, particularly in a city because it's really so again, you're in your own space, so hopefully you can that and you can put notes around your computer and can make it work for you. And again, back to the idea of being close to someone you love and they're part of the
And Marc?
Yeah, I think another advantage, and I think what we're starting to find is that people who get very nervous perhaps face to face, I'm hearing less nervous. I think that environment of being at home, in being able to have notes in front of you, for example. So one of the great things is that you can have posted notes or you can have notes. So you're able to feel better prepared, to prompt you. As I say, I think it's a home environment. Yeah, it's a home environment where you're comfortable, you can get yourself together, and obviously, as Claire said, the travel. But again, it is that the benefit, but it is that making sure that you arrive at your interview. But yeah, I think they're the main things. I think what I'm hearing is nervous. People who are nervous, for some people, it's helping with anxiety. They're actually performing better in virtual interviews than perhaps they used to in face to face.
Yeah. And I think going back to the preparation as well, the preparation you do for a virtual interview is very similar to the actual interview, isn't it? So you can watch yourself on video and that is actually what you're going to look like. And hopefully that won't put you off, but in a positive kind of way, that's, it's the best replication I think you can do. And going on to the post-it notes that you said, I have had a couple of clients that have had interviews at Amazon, and I don't know if anyone else watching has had an interview at Amazon, but they're quite intense, their interviews, and they have these leadership principles that you have to reference in all the questions. So both of these ladies have used flip charts and had them stuck up on their walls behind them. So again, the interviewer can't see that, but they basically listed out all of these leadership principles and then some keywords. So I think that's kind of worth mentioning as well. If you're going to have post-its, don't have full sentences, just have keywords there just to prompt you.
Yeah, don't read.
Don't read, yes. Yeah, okay. And I've just had a comment from Amanda here to say she's bought a desktop whiteboard that she can place notes prep next to the screen. So perfect, yeah, because that's the other thing with post-its, I suppose. If you have maybe a cheaper brand, they do tend to fall off, which could be a little bit distracting. Yeah. No, thank you for that, Amanda. Okay, so we're going to head over to the next question now. So that is, how can you portray your energy and enthusiasm whilst you're on Zoom or Teams or whatever virtual platform it is? So Claire, do you want to start on that one again?
Yeah. I think this is really important to convey enthusiasm, but it's quite hard to get it right. So you need to know yourself. So if you're naturally quite an enthusiastic person, you may just need to be you, but if you're perhaps a little bit more thoughtful, a bit more reserved, you might just want to give a few more gestures. It's obviously important to be authentic. We spoke about green screen. Again, gestures, you do have to be a bit careful because sometimes you get this aura around your body. I think it's really important not to be a cardboard cutout. One of the tips I've certainly heard is not have arms on your chair because that can make you very rigid in how you come across. Interestingly, radio actors are told to make gestures even though nobody can see it because it affects your voice. So don't be shy in actually using your hands if appropriate.
I think we've kind of answered Michael's question in there with what you were just talking about not being a cardboard cutout. So I'll put the question back on the screen now. Marc, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think that I think one of the things I would say, and probably come back to this, is of all the things about being prepared for virtual interviews and about probably how you make that difference is getting the energy level right. Because without energy, you aren't necessarily getting across your personality. So I think would make that very, very clear. How you find that energy. I think just reiterating Claire's point. I think how you regulate your energy. So it's been said that I'm quite enthusiastic. Being open with people. I sometimes get my arms carried away. I've got these, and probably with clients on at least 2 or 3 occasions, my kind of things have come out my ears. So if you're being interviewed, not a great thing to do. So I have to probably regulate myself down a little bit because I am naturally energetic. I think the other side, I think the cardboard cutout is really important and posture. What I also think, if you're naturally maybe a little bit introverted and a bit still, is I think 2 things. Sarah, you mentioned it, is get across to the organisation that you're really excited about the job. So you can actually say in that at some point in the discussion, say say to you, so why are you interested in the role? And you say, well, actually, this is the perfect role for me. This is great. Because naturally you've got that positive energy coming through you, and it will show up. Because if you really want the job, that is going to come across. And I think the other thing is with your answers is think about words. So it's natural. You've got to be authentic. You've got to be true to yourself. But if you can use words, chances are, I'm change orientated. It's about taking action. I like to drive things through. I'm collaborative. Probably the words that you would naturally use, but just making sure you do those. And I think the last piece for me is don't create a persona, don't be something you're not.
Yeah.
Because if you do get the job and you physically or virtually walk through the door and you are not this kind of naturally bubbly, effervescent person, you're, much more introverted, well, you've kind of misrepresented yourself, and it's not a great way to start a job if people feel you've been representing yourself as not a true person. So use the prep. You've got to be authentic. You've got to be true to yourself.
I guess it would be exhausting as well if you're trying to kind of be something you're not when you actually start the job as well. So, and I think you're right there, Marc, what you're saying about the making sure you get across how much you want the job. And I think we go back to our very first session, we had Lee Jones from Holden Jones on, so he's a recruitment company, and he said exactly that. So he had two candidates going for the same job, and they were neck and neck, and the interviewer had to decide, and they went for the person who had actually said, I really, really want this job. So I think it is really important to just remind people that you are actually really keen on the job.
I'll start, Sarah. Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
I think, understandably at the moment, a number of people who are job searching may be thinking maybe there might be some kind of compromise, or they might think, actually, I need to think more broadly about the type of role that I want.
Yeah.
I think people have to be very careful, because if a role they wouldn't necessarily have looked for in a different, in the world before the pandemic, how do you get that across? So how can you get that enthusiasm across and energy if in reality it isn't necessarily your first choice of role? So again, it's something to think about to make sure with your energy, that doesn't come across.
Yeah.
That just as an aside in terms of the role that you're potentially prepared to go for, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Sensible thing to think about your energy levels in your body.
Yeah.
So it's enthusiasm, but not desperation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the balance. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple of comments here. So Jeffrey has said, in response to Michael's point on posture, I find more energy and focus by conducting interviews standing up. That's a really good point. And then Paul's replied to that also to say he always stands when he's presenting or using Zoom and Teams, and he would probably do an interview that in an interview situation now. So that's good tips as well. So I guess that's all about practice as well, isn't it? And trying out what works for you. We have another question here about virtual interviews. So if you are having a virtual interview with different time zone, like India and Western countries, any suggestions from your end? So Marc, have you got any experience of that, of sort of scheduling with time zones?
The only thing is, the honest answer is no. But the only thing I found with the clients, to be honest with you, is if you don't get the times right, if you don't get the time zones right on Zoom, then the interviewee could get quite confused potentially, or the interviewer, because then say you're 5 hours behind in one of them, that would probably show up on the time zone on Zoom, because Zoom is automatically set to GMT. So what I would say is when an appointment goes in, if you're interviewing in a different time zone, is make it very, very clear that the time that's put in the calendar appointment is the time of the appointment. And even reference, the Zoom time may say differently, but this is the time of the interview. So that hasn't happened to me in an interview, but with one new client, he had previously been working in another part of the world. So it looked like the actual Zoom time was wrong. So that was it came up for me.
Yeah, and similarly, I've not had an interview situation, but I have had a couple of clients that are abroad, and also I've run a couple of webinars with places in America. So I think it's really just about trying to find a mutually convenient time so that one of you's not got to get up ridiculously early, etc. So again, if that's possible.
So I've interviewed people in Israel, Turkey, and Russia, and it was a different medium from Zoom. But I think one of the things to say is if there is any tiny sort of lag on either end, but before you start the interview, just to say to somebody, if we end up speaking over one another, please don't worry about it. To sort of put somebody at their ease. And Equally, if you're being interviewed, don't worry about it if that happens, because I think everyone understands that occasionally the doesn't quite, can be a bit laggy.
Yeah. Yeah, that leads in really nicely to Michael's question there, Claire. So what tips do you have to avoid talking over the interviewer? So in virtual interviews, it's difficult to know when they have stopped talking. So Claire, have you got any ideas on that particular question?
I think you're absolutely right, Mike. It's really easy to do. I think if it happens, then obviously, apologise. I think it's obviously you just have to try and watch, watch it very carefully. Try and hold back.
And Marc, have you already acknowledged that you do talk quite a lot? What tips have you got?
I think we can say that live in front of 70 people.
I'm saying nothing, Sarah.
I probably smile because this is something again that always a development need for me in meetings, because really in this situation it's what I would call you've got to embrace the silence to be comfortable with it. So if somebody's talking to you, you have to curb your enthusiasm to speak and actually be prepared to sit there and maybe even have a couple of seconds where nothing's said, because otherwise, particularly in an interview as an interviewee, the energy and enthusiasm is there. The risk is you will accidentally interrupt. So I think you've just got to embrace the silence. And I'm smiling because that's very intuitive for me. I want to talk. So I'm a good case study again for not doing it. And if there's any of my clients on, I apologise normally 5 or 6 times in a meeting because I'm ready to say something and they haven't quite finished. They pause. They silence.
Excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so next question then. So how do you go about establishing empathy and rapport? So Marc, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a challenge. I think again, first thing is how can you get your energy across? How can you get that enthusiasm across? That's naturally going to build empathy. Obviously, another thing, if you think about face-to-face interview, you go into a room, you shake somebody's hand, you get the opportunity to look at them. I can say look into people's eyes, so that's quite a fact, is it? But make eye contact with the person. I think the other thing is, again, this can be difficult for some people, but sometimes maybe it is about saying something, saying, how you doing, or so maybe a little bit of small talk, but be really careful, because I know Claire and I, we were talking about this yesterday, which is do not be familiar, do not start asking questions like, how are you doing, I've just been all right with you, where do you live, or whatever, nothing really inappropriate, or just too much. I think the other piece is, again, mirroring the body language. So see how they are, try and read the interviewer, what their body language is like, are you getting warmth from them? I also think on a cautionary side, whether this is the virtual interview or in person, this is what I would call that dangerous, that kind of, it's not quite the interview that you're prepared for, you're probably a little bit nervous. So in some ways, coming back to the previous point, maybe you need to sit there and just wait. Just calm yourself and wait for them to speak. One last point again. This may be just thinking about people. One of the questions we talked about is, are interviewers going to start asking you how you're feeling? So is that going to be a natural question with the lockdown and the pandemic, where the interviewers, the main conversation might say, how's it going at the moment? How are you finding it? Are you okay working from home? Be ready for that question. We did a session a couple of weeks ago, me and Lucy Dennis did it, but more and more have an answer for that. Because people are feeling it at the moment. That could create, particularly if you're nervous and off guard, it could create a slight reaction in you that you perhaps wouldn't want to. So I would prepare for that. That would be a clip for me. Period at the beginning before we start.
Okay. Right, anything to add?
But I think also part of your research, do you have any connections, or is there any points of contact? But I think to echo Marc's point, let the interviewer be this. It make them feel it's obviously they're in control and if necessary embrace the silence.
Okay. So I am conscious of time, but we have got a couple more questions, so we're just going to keep on going. So hopefully people can still stay on. We've still got about 40 people online, so it's really great. So Anthony has just asked, how do you field off-guard and challenging questions, thinking on your feet? So I think, Marc, this can go to you, because that's something you are good at, thinking on your feet.
I think that's an excellent question, which is exactly what I would say. So I think if you are caught off guard, I think the first thing to say is, that's a really good question. Or also, potentially caught off guard is to say, oh, would you mind repeating that for me, please? So that's an excellent question because that buys you time. And also, genuinely, if you've been maybe caught slightly off guard, is to say, would you mind repeating that? Sure. So you're absolutely clear, and you're answering the right questions. That would be two kind of things I would do in that.
Yeah. So Zara has asked a very similar question, so challenging questions that are new for me. So Claire, have you got anything to add to what Marc said?
Yeah, Marc, what you said was very helpful. I would say back to sort of answer the question that it's often about preparation. Prepare for all the questions you would absolutely hate. I'd hate to be asked about that. I didn't enjoy that job very much. Prepare. And I think that is always, whatever the questions are, you mentally thought about them, a bit like that University of Pittsburgh, your mind already got used to thinking how you'd respond.
Yeah, good. So it's just reminded me of a question I had once. So I went for an interview as a people person. So it was basically like an HR business partner type role. And the first question was, we want to design a garden. How are you going to go about doing that? That totally threw me because I had absolutely no idea about planning a garden. So I kind of just said, wow, that's a great question, like you said, Marc. And then I just thought, okay, it's kind of a project. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go and talk to all my stakeholders, find out what it is. So I think just by acknowledging it's a difficult question to start with, and then thinking, okay, logically, it's a project. That kind of helped me deal with the question, and then it kind of flowed quite nicely from there. So yeah, I'm sure everyone's got situations like that they've had. But I think that's the thing, is try to kind of maintain your nerve, I guess.
I think also, just adding, I think if the preparation is there, there are always potentially going to be questions that you might not get. If you do preparation and you're ready, you're going to be in a very, very good frame of mind anyway. That's my doorbell and the dog going again.
Yeah, planned again, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think if you're prepared, you always, you may get that. Question. I can't answer the question now because the dog's put move on.
That's fine. And I guess if it is really, really difficult, then maybe you have to say, actually, I can't answer that. Can I come back to you after the interview? Maybe being that brave, it might be an option. Okay, so Liz has come up with, how do you handle nerves whilst interviewing remotely? So Claire, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Lawrence Olivier was always asked by aspiring actors how to, what top tips he would never give any, apart from, he said, relax your feet. Because he said it really affected your whole being. And there's Caroline Goyder talks about this FOSBOC exercise, which is feet on floor, bottom on chair, and it's about relaxing into your chair, feeling the waves, breathing. This is obviously before the interview, this is not during the interview, but actually, even if you do it for 30 seconds, it really can make a difference to how you approach an interview just before you go into it.
Great. Okay, I'm going to set up another question from Liz, and then Marc, if you can answer this one. So, what would be a reasonable time to follow up after an interview? So, I guess it's not specific to virtual interviews, but that's all we've got at the moment. So, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think I'd probably, maybe I'd do that in two parts, but maybe at the natural end of the interview, I would probably ask about, so what, would you mind telling me what next steps are? Potentially from that, you might get the answer that way. I think if you don't, and you don't want to push it too hard, I would probably, if I had no idea, so if the client, or sorry, if the interviewer hadn't given me any indication, I would probably give it around, I'd probably give it around a week, maybe slightly less. I'd certainly be patient.
Great, thank you. So Michael's just asked, can you quote the Gravitas book again?
Yes, it's written by Caroline Goyder, and it's just called Gravitas, and it's a fantastic read.
So what we'll do afterwards is just add that to the comments of the thread so that people can then click on it for more information. So thanks for that. Okay, so we are at the end of our questions. So just coming on to the last question now. So final thoughts or advice. So Marc, if you can start with this one. So final thoughts and advice.
The big thing that I would say, and I mentioned it earlier, is in an interview situation, there's many things you can do, like the background, like the lighting, the microphone, etc. But the one thing that is really, really going to set you apart and really bring across your strengths is getting your personality across. So that really is something that as a person you must work on. And again, coming back to it, this is where I guess we have to talk about and practice and be recorded and watch ourselves, because we're going to learn so much about it. Also, get somebody to interview you and give you that feedback, because you've got to be able to project, regulate, but get your personality across and get that energy across, and that energy and that passion and that enthusiasm is really important.
Great, thank you. And Claire?
Again, I would just say practice. I think it's just so important just to feeling comfortable with the words and thinking about the language you want to use as best as possible. And I also think that it's really important to think it's not just about them assessing me, I'm also assessing them. It's it makes it a bit more of a level playing field, and that will give you confidence. Do I want to work for them? Is it a good interview? Is it run well? Am I treated with respect?
Absolutely, that's really great, thank you. So thank you. We are at the end of, well, we're kind of over our normal time, but it's been really interesting chat, so thank you. Another thank you comment coming up there. So next week we're back at the same time again. I've got another quote from Michael here. Gary Player's mantra: the more I practice, the luckier I get. Yeah, that's great. I've seen that quite a lot quoted recently on LinkedIn. So yes, next week we're on week 10 of Career Insights, and we will be covering personal brand. So that is kind of in real life, but also on social media. Particularly now, I think it's probably more important than ever to have a really good brand on social media. So I'll be joined by Chris Thorne and Hannah Nash on that one. So same time next week, 12 o'clock, and we'll be setting up a event again that seemed to work quite well this time. So we've got a few more messages appearing, so I'm just going to put those up on the screen. So there you go from Liz. So thank you. It's all about getting your personality across. Great session again. Well done, everyone. Thank you. Michael, great session, guys. Okay. Lots coming up here. It was really nice to have all of these comments. Thank you. Okay, now there is another question. We're not going to be able to cover it today, but we will have a session on this in the coming weeks. So all about handling different behavioural questions. So we are going to be having a session that is focused on kind of how to actually answer questions. So today was very much about virtual interviews. So thank you again for watching, and we will see you next week for personal brand. Thanks very much, Claire and Marc.
Thank you.
Thanks.